The clock is ticking on a season that has everything it needs to end in a deep playoff run, and that is exactly why what we saw in the second half against Buffalo cannot be ignored, brushed aside, or minimized. This team is 11-5. One game left in the regular season, playoffs locked in, a home game guaranteed in the wild card round, possibly more. And yet there is a growing sense of unease among those of us who watch this team closely every single snap. The concern is not about talent. It is not about effort. It is not even about identity. The concern is about decisions, and more specifically, who is making them when the game tightens, when the margin for error disappears, and when championships are decided. Nick Sirianni said it himself after the Bills game. He used the word assertive. He admitted that he needs to be more involved in second-half offensive decisions. That alone tells you everything you need to know about how alarming that second half really was. 17 total offensive yards, 0 completions by the quarterback, 1 single first down. That is not just a bad half of football. That is unacceptable for any team with playoff aspirations, let alone a roster this loaded with proven veteran talent on offense. This is where the spotlight turns directly to Kevin Patullo. To be clear, this is not about erasing what he has done well. The opening scripts have been good. The Eagles have started games faster than they have in recent years. The red zone work, particularly involving Dallas Goedert, has been effective, and Goedert is having a career year with 11 receiving touchdowns for a reason. But football games are not won in the first 15 plays alone, especially not in January. They are won in the adjustments, in the responses, in the moments where you have to close the door instead of hoping the other team makes a mistake. The pattern is impossible to ignore. First down offense has been bad. Patullo acknowledged that himself. Second down offense has been just as damaging. The Eagles are constantly behind the chains, stuck in second and long and third and long situations. And then the response is conservative run calls into stacked boxes. Even more alarming, Patullo openly admitted that sometimes they are running to run, regardless of the defensive look, with no ability for Jalen Hurts to check out of the play. That is not modern offense. That is willingly walking into disadvantageous situations and hoping execution bails you out. Against Buffalo, this approach completely collapsed. On second and long, run plays went for 1, 2, maybe 3 yards at most, setting up 3rd and 7 or worse. On third and long, the passing concepts were predictable, slow developing, and often limited to hitch routes that defenses around the league have already shown they can sit on. There were personnel groupings filled with backup tight ends and running backs, condensed sets that gave Hurts essentially one read. If it was not there, throw it away. That is not putting your quarterback in a position to succeed. This is why blaming Jalen Hurts for the second half of that game misses the point entirely. In the first half, Hurts was excellent. 14 of 21, 110 yards, a touchdown, and several throws that were elite by any standard, especially considering the weather. The completion to DeVonta Smith on third down between 2 defenders.
The throw on the run to A.J. Brown along the sideline, with perfect ball placement between coverage. That is high-level quarterback play. Then the second half arrives, and suddenly the offense puts a straitjacket on him. The ball is taken out of his hands, creativity disappears, and fear replaces aggression. Yes, the offensive line struggled. Cam Jurgens had a rough game. Landon Dickerson looked lost at times. Penalties and execution issues were real. Nick Sirianni deserves his share of responsibility because Patullo is an extension of his scheme, his philosophy, his staff. But at some point, the head coach has to intervene. Watching 2 full quarters of offensive stagnation without stepping in is not leadership, especially when you already know this has been a season-long issue. What makes this situation even more dangerous is the playoff context. If the season ended today, the Eagles would host the Los Angeles Rams as the 6th seed. That is not an easy draw. That is a dangerous opponent capable of turning a close fourth-quarter game into a disaster if you give them opportunities. In games like that, you are not going to win because of conservative play calling. You are going to win by trusting your quarterback, attacking on early downs, and refusing to shrink when the moment grows. The scary truth is this. With Kevin Patullo calling the second half of close playoff games, the Eagles are not trying to win. They are trying not to lose. And that mindset has already nearly cost them games this season. There's a massive middle ground between being reckless and being paralyzed, and too often, this offense falls into the latter once halftime adjustments begin. Nick Sirianni does not need to reinvent himself as a full-time play caller, but situational control matters. Andy Reid did it. Doug Peterson did it. Delegating or reclaiming play-calling duties in critical moments is not a sign of weakness, it is a recognition of strengths and limitations. Patullo has shown clear weaknesses in second half in situational play calling, and ignoring that is gambling with a season that has Super Bowl level potential. This defense is playing at a championship level. That much is undeniable. And wasting a season like this because the offense disappears for entire halves would be one of the most frustrating endings this fan base has ever endured. The solution may not be perfect, and it may not fix everything, but doing nothing is no longer an option. So now the question becomes this: do you believe Nick Sirianni must take over second half play calling responsibilities to protect this team's Super Bowl window, or do you still trust Kevin Patullo to figure it out when the playoffs begin? Because if there's one thing that became crystal clear after going back through the Buffalo game, it is that this team is being carried by its defense while the offense is actively putting itself in difficult positions. And that imbalance is dangerous, not because the defense cannot handle its job, but because history tells us you cannot ask even an elite unit to be perfect every single week in January. Eventually, the offense has to contribute more than survival football. Look at how dominant this defense truly is. Jalen Carter continues to play like a foundational piece, impacting games even when he does not show up loudly on the stat sheet. His blocked extra point against Buffalo was not just a highlight, it was a turning point. Zach Bond delivered one of the most important hits of the season on 4th and goal, stopping Josh Allen in a moment where the entire game hung in the balance. These are championship-level plays made under maximum pressure, and it goes deeper than the stars. The role players are not just holding the line, they are elevating the unit. Marcus Epps stepped in and made multiple massive stops on the goal line, then followed it up with a physical open field hit on James Cook that nearly forced a turnover. His coverage, his tackling, his discipline have all been outstanding since he re-entered the lineup. This is a defense where even the next man up is producing at a high level. Jihad Campbell's performance against Buffalo should erase any remaining doubts about what the Eagles have in him. After being benched earlier in the season, he stayed professional, stayed ready, and the moment his number was called again, he played like one of the best linebackers on the field. Sideline to sideline range, elite coverage ability, strong tackling against the run, and instincts that consistently put him around the football. According to Pro Football Focus, he was the highest graded Eagle in that game, and the film backs it up. Losing Nakobe Dean hurts, but this defense does not collapse because of it, and that speaks volumes about roster construction and development. The defensive line rotation continues to overwhelm opponents. Josh Sweat, Jordan Davis, and the impact of the Jalen Phillips addition have transformed the front into a relentless wave of pressure. Phillips led the team in pressures against Buffalo, added a sack, and consistently disrupted timing. This is a defense that does not need help. It needs support. That is why the offensive issues feel so heavy. This is not a rebuilding year. This is not a team learning how to win. This is a roster built to contend right now. And yet, too often, the offense plays as if protecting a lead is more important than extending it. Shotgun draws on 3rd and long. Screen passes behind the line of scrimmage on 3rd and 8. Slow developing concepts with limited route combinations. Late snaps at the line of scrimmage that allow defenses to disguise and dictate. When Kevin Patullo speaks about these problems, the explanations only add to the concern. Acknowledging poor first down offense while continuing to call conservative runs into stacked boxes is not self-correction. Admitting that 2nd and long situations are killing drives while dialing up plays that guarantee 3rd and long is not adjustment. It is stubbornness. And in the playoffs, stubbornness ends seasons. Jalen Hurts deserves context, not criticism, for what happened in that second half. The box score is ugly, yes. 0 completions in an entire half stands out in today's NFL. But when the quarterback is consistently placed in impossible situations, with limited reads, predictable concepts, and no rhythm established on early downs, failure becomes almost inevitable. The encouraging part is that Hurts has looked significantly better since the Chargers game. Against the Raiders, the Commanders, and especially in the first half against Buffalo, he showed accuracy, poise, and confidence. That matters far more than one half distorted by coaching malpractice. This is where Nick Sirianni's role becomes unavoidable. He cannot be passive anymore. Being more assertive cannot just be a quote from a press conference. It has to show up in real decisions. Situational play calling, second half intervention, and a willingness to take the reins when things stall are responsibilities that come with being a head coach in a Super Bowl window. Trust is important, but blind trust is dangerous. The Eagles do not need perfection from the offense. They do not need to score on every drive. They need competence, adaptability, and aggression at the right moments. If the offense can simply maintain a baseline level of production, this team can beat anyone in the NFC. If it disappears like it did against Buffalo, even the best defense in football can only carry you so far. This season is on a knife's edge. The margin between a deep playoff run and a painfully wasted opportunity is thinner than it has ever been. Everything is there. The roster, the defense, the quarterback, the experience. The question is whether the coaching decisions will rise to the level of the talent, or whether they will be the reason it all ends too soon. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Nick Sirianni must step in and take control of second-half offensive play calling, or do you still trust Kevin Patullo to adjust when the playoffs arrive? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this breakdown matches what you've been seeing on the field, subscribe to the channel for more Eagles coverage, and keep watching because the next video is already on your screen. What cannot be ignored either is how late this offense consistently gets to the line of scrimmage. It has become one of the quiet but damaging themes of the season. When you are slow getting the snap off, you eliminate flexibility. You give defenses time to disguise coverage, shift fronts, and dictate leverage. That is exactly what modern NFL defenses want, especially against an offense that already struggles on early downs. The Eagles run more hitch concepts than almost anyone in the league, and when those routes are paired with slow tempo and predictable structure, the result is exactly what we keep seeing. Tight windows, stalled drives, and an offense that looks disconnected from the rhythm of the game. This is why the frustration is not emotional, it is logical. There's too much evidence. Too many games where the Eagles dominate for a half and then completely vanish. Not inconsistent, not uneven, non-existent. 1 first down, 17 yards. Entire quarters where the defense barely gets a breather because the offense cannot sustain anything. That is not variance. That is a systemic problem. And the cruel part is that this roster does not need hero ball. It does not need trick plays or desperation calls. It needs early down efficiency. It needs to trust Jalen Hurts to throw on first and second down. It needs to stop treating leads like fragile objects that must be protected instead of expanded. When the Eagles are aggressive early, they dictate. When they retreat into conservatism, they invite chaos. Look around the locker room. This team believes. The defense believes it can win any game. The quarterback believes he can make every throw required. The receivers believe they can separate. The tight ends believe they can be mismatches. But belief without alignment at the top turns into frustration, and frustration is what leads to tight football in January. Nick Sirianni does not need to publicly demote anyone. He does not need to make dramatic announcements. He simply needs to do what great head coaches have always done. Recognize where his team is vulnerable and act before it is too late. Situational football is where seasons are decided. 2-minute drills, 4-minute offense, third and medium play calls that determine whether drives live or die. Those moments demand clarity and courage, not predictability. The defense has already proven it will show up. Week after week, different players make game-changing plays. Jalen Carter, Zach Bond, Marcus Epps, Jihad Campbell, Jordan Davis, Jalen Phillips, Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean. This unit is deep, disciplined, and fast. It is not asking for help. It is asking not to be sabotaged by inactivity on the other side of the ball. And that is the fear Eagles fans cannot shake. Not that this team is flawed. Not that the NFC is too strong. But that a championship-caliber season could end because adjustments were acknowledged but never truly made. Because warnings were seen but ignored. Because a head coach trusted loyalty over urgency. There is still time. 1 game left in the regular season. A chance to experiment, to prepare, to establish a different pattern before the postseason begins. Nothing is lost yet, but nothing is guaranteed either. There's also an emotional layer to all of this that numbers and film alone cannot fully capture. You can see it on the sideline when drives stall. You can feel it when the defense comes back on the field after a 3-and-out that took less than 2 minutes off the clock. Football players will never publicly point fingers, especially on a team this united, but body language tells stories long before press conferences do. When an elite defense keeps delivering stops and the offense responds by giving the ball right back, that wears on everyone, no matter how strong the culture is. This is why the idea of just trusting the process feels hollow at this stage of the season. Processes are built for growth. January is about results. At some point, repetition without correction becomes negligence. The Eagles are not losing because they lack answers. They are losing opportunities because they refuse to use the ones already available. Think about how narrow the margins will be in the playoffs. 1 possession, 1 mistake, 1 conservative decision on 2nd and 8 that turns into 3rd and 9. 1 abandoned drive that flips field position. Against teams like the Rams, the 49ers, or any opponent capable of striking quickly, that is all it takes. No defense, no matter how dominant, should be asked to live in sudden change situations all game long. The frustrating part for Eagles fans is that this offense has already shown it can operate at a much higher level. We have seen it. We have seen tempo. We have seen balance. We have seen Hurts in control. making pre-snap decisions, attacking coverage, and playing with confidence. That version of the offense does not vanish by accident. It disappears when philosophy shifts from attacking to surviving. Nick Sirianni's responsibility now is not about ego or optics. It is about stewardship. He is the head coach of a team built to win now, not later. Delegation is a strength, but only when it serves the mission. When it starts threatening the mission, leadership requires intervention. History does not remember who called the plays. It remembers who lifted the trophy and who let the moment slip away. The window is open, wide open. The defense is historically good. The quarterback is battle-tested. The roster is deep. This is not a team asking for miracles. It is a team asking for alignment, courage, and adaptability when it matters most. So as this season stands on the edge of the postseason, everything comes back to one simple truth. Talent will get you into the playoffs, but decisions will determine how far you go. One more layer that deserves attention is how predictable fear becomes to opposing defenses. Defensive coordinators around the league are not guessing anymore when the Eagles take a lead into halftime. They are anticipating conservative tendencies, early down runs, limited formations, and slow developing concepts. When that expectation is met drive after drive, defenses stop reacting and start attacking. That is when you see linebackers firing downhill without hesitation, safeties sitting on routes, and pass rushers pinning their ears back on obvious passing downs. The offense is no longer dictating terms. It is responding, and responding late. This is especially damaging because the Eagles' offensive personnel is built to punish aggression. A.J. Brown thrives on physical one-on-one matchups. DeVonta Smith wins with precision and timing. Dallas Goedert creates mismatches against linebackers and safeties. Jalen Hurts is at his best when he is allowed to process, threaten defenses vertically, and keep them honest with his legs. None of that works when early downs are treated like placeholders instead of opportunities. The idea that the Eagles must establish